We're here again. I hope everyone appreciates my beautiful background. Trying something different tonight. Should be good. I don't want to take too long. I'm not going to be looking at any comments till the end. So, anyone who just tunes into this and sees this, you could throw up some comments if you have any questions, but I'll have to address them at the end because I'd just like to get through this. This is going to be a great way to close the chapter on some of the things that we've been talking about for the last few sessions. I was excited to get that Aura video out there. That one turned out pretty good, I think, and the next one is going to be on the geomagnetism of the planet that we talked about last week. But that video, I didn't do very well in that one, so I'm probably gonna go through and record little extras and add in the things I missed because I was all over the place with that. But it's all good. I got so much material out there. I don't even know. Still didn't get to the Angels and Demons video, which kind of brings up the topic of tonight because I figured before I start diving into some of that stuff, I would rather put out my perspective and where I stand on the divine order and things of that nature. So, in this session, I want to explore these concepts not just from the scientific point of view, like we've done in the particles and waves video, but we're going to talk about the philosophy of it as well because I feel like they're two sides of the same coin. And we're going to get into that. I want to show how uh, some of this information is circular and it seems to reveal itself over time in that way. Uh, something I realized, and like I didn't just come to this conclusion overnight. This is a lot of these things have been hinting at this for a long time, but uh, I feel like our scientific understanding is giving us some evidence for it these days. So most people know like the concept of know thyself, which is inscribed at the Temple of Delphi for Apollo in ancient Greece, and we could still see it this to this day. And I feel like that was also a strong concept in Stoicism, and the ancient Greeks believed that if you know yourself, you could know the universe. I think that some of the philosophy that hints at that from back in the ancient days is coming full circle these days, and what we're learning through quantum physics and astrophysics and trying to bridge the gap between the micro and the macro is kind of bringing us full circle right back around to that same concept that you have to know yourself. So that's kind of the case I want to make tonight. I've just put out that reel where I explain how most people understand we don't really touch each other because we're separated by electromagnetic fields. The sensation of touch happens at such a microscopic level that we can't tell. So when these fields are repelling each other, we still feel the sensation, but we don't actually physically touch. That would actually, if our atoms were to collide, that would cause nuclear fusion. So there would be an atomic explosion every time we actually touch. So the electronic fields that separate us, they're still measurable, they're still detectable, and they still exist. So and those fields are touching all the other fields around them, and we know that there's no such thing as a perfect vacuum. There's in the air, there's always something in the air around us. Scientists have never made a perfect vacuum, not just the neutrinos and the dark matter and dark energy, but other undetectable fields like the Higgs field. So we're always touching everything. Our electric fields are always touching everything. So I think the concept of know thyself and it so we'll get into the philosophy. I'm not there yet, but we will get into that first. In almost every culture I wanted to mention, because for a long time I hinted the concept of duality, and a lot of you point at how unity is the ultimate answer. A lot of you have commented with things like that. And this shows also in like the Christian view, the Gnostic Christian view, not the classic Christian view, but Gnosticism in Christianity preaches that we're all one and we all come from that one same divine source and that we're all connected to that one source and that that source is eternal and infinite and ubiquitous. So that's a common theme that's found in Hinduism also that predates Christianity by a few thousand years even. So if anyone, even people who do yoga and stuff, they're familiar with the terms Akash and Brahman. In Hinduism, the Brahman represents the ultimate one unity of everything. It was the connection of the spiritual and the physical. Saying that everything is all one. The Akash is the non-physical. So a lot of people, a lot of these new age spiritualists, they make videos about the Akashic records, and it's usually vague, and usually they're just pulling things out of thin air when they're talking about the Akashic records. But the Akashic records refer to the mirror version of this physical realm. And my point is that maybe in these ancient days they were onto something. We spent thousands of years looking at things through the mythological standpoint like that to explain the non-physical, and then for for the last few hundred years we entered into the age of enlightenment, the industrial revolution, the scientific revolution, and that dawned the age of materialism, basically material science, which got us really far. But in these more recent days we're kind of coming full circle back around to non-material science, and that's what gives us these satellites and these cell phones and everything. And that's where we're learning more about the forces around us that we can't see or measure. And my point is that we've always known this, and almost all cultures have hinted at this for a long time. And we've kind of became separated from that through material science. But I think that was a necessary step to bring us full circle, to give us an actual full understanding of it. So we don't have to explain these things with mythology. We don't have to personify these deities. That we can actually measure these things, like such as the Planck field. So that's the argument I want to make tonight. So whenever it's a few people have asked me recently, so I'm gonna make a short out of this video just so when people ask me the question, I can refer them back to it. But if I had to make a stance, and I don't think that we have to marry any ideas, but if I had to, and if I had to come up with a title for myself and where I stand on the concept of God, I would say it's a form of dualistic monism, which is almost a contradiction. But that's the argument I want to make tonight. The monism meaning all is one, and everything is one interconnected field. It's inseparable. But the only way that that field can evidently exist is through duality and separation and motion. So that's the argument I want to make tonight. You also see this concept in like Chinese Taoism. That's why I love the yin yang. And you can see in the yin yang it represents one whole being that's divided. And it's not just a straight line down the middle. It's the curves in the lines that they represent motion. So motion is necessary. We are a divided form of unity. And that's both sides of the coin that I was talking about before, the Akashic being the opposite of this physical world, and the unity of two of them being Brahman. It's hard to not go reference back to Hinduism and their philosophies, because that was probably the most prominent and most ancient religion that references unity and wholeness in general. But you also see it in most Native American traditions. They're well aware of the circle of life and how we all feed each other and feed off of each other, and we come from the same place and we go back to the same place. But the journey in between is necessary. And especially in the Lakota and the Sioux tribe, like they were well aware. They would tell a lot of different stories, and we're going to get into how most of the stories we know this day also represent the same theme of coming full circle in life and coming full circle in a journey and ending up right back where you started. But the journey is necessary. The movement is necessary, because if you don't move, if you never get up and go anywhere, then there's no experience, there's no growth. And this is what I believe the ancient Greeks were talking about when they inscribed "Know thyself" in the temple of Apollo. You can't know yourself from just sitting stagnant. You have to know the world to know thyself. So I also, when Moses asked God in the burning bush what his name was, and God said, "I am that I am," or even some translations just say "I am." I think that's kind of representing the same thing from a slightly different lens. The Zulu tribe also has a phrase called "a person is a person through other people," and I think they were kind of trying to reflect that same sentiment there. And of course, most of us are familiar with the common phrase in Hermeticism, "as above, so below; as within, so without." And I think that's kind of reflecting the same concept here, two sides of the same coin, and not you can't truly understand one without the other. And like know thyself, I don't think the Greek word for knowledge is similar to the Greek word for wisdom. And in our English language, the the etymology kind of forces us to separate the two, but they could be interchangeable in the Greek form. So we understand knowledge, I would say these days, as the application, or the understanding, the intellectual understanding of something would be the knowledge. Maybe like, I don't know, the wisdom would be the application of that knowledge, and the understanding of that knowledge through experience. I think that's what brings on wisdom. So you can't really know anything just from reading about it in a book. You can learn a lot, but going through the experiences, or finding examples to where you can at least emotionally experience the same thing, is what brings real wisdom, I think. So I think that's why we see this on a personal level in our everyday lives, why we have to go through struggles and make ourselves uncomfortable. But it's reflected everywhere in nature, and I think we're kind of going through that cycle as a culture on a larger scale. The same way that the sacred geometric shapes of biology and cosmology happen on a fractal scale, I think we experience these things on a fractal scale. And I mean, it's tough because a lot of the videos we've talked about in the past would bring a lot more understanding to this. So I'm gonna add this to our playlist on the nature of reality. This will be the most recent video on there. So some of the videos that come before this one are going to be, they would really help put some of this into perspective. But I want to kind of paint a multi-dimensional view of this. So I'm going to start out, like I said, with the philosophical perspective, and then we'll start out from the scientific lens. I want to start out on a micro scale, a quantum scale, and then zoom out to a macro scale that we experience every day and that we can see around us, and then we'll zoom out even farther to the cosmic scale, because I really think this same principle is reflected in all those ways. Same as the Fibonacci spiral that I've referenced all the time, that we find everywhere in nature. It's the same way that leaves grow on plants, and the same way that cellular division happens is in this same pattern of phi that's mapped out, and it's just a growing spiral. You see it in seashells. You can see it, like I said, in the division of cells, and you can even see it in the geomagnetic fields around all magnets and human bodies and the planet Earth. And we also see it when you zoom out even further in the shape of gravitational lensing for black holes and everything. So this is a geometric shape that you can see everywhere in nature, from the smallest to the largest scale. And I think the point of this is that it's an infinite circle. It can put potentially it can shrink down and never stop shrinking, and it can grow out and never stop growing. But the point is that it always comes back around full circle to where it started, just having grown a little bit from there. Uh, and I say that to just to emphasize the fact that I think this is the cycle we're experiencing on a cultural level through our growth of understanding. Like I said, we humans kind of always knew this, and we've always hinted at it, but we I think we had to separate from it for a long time to fully understand it. We had to get both sides of the picture. Now, the other side of the picture is the non-physical side, like I referenced, and we know that there's everything around us. There's information contained in all of the electromagnetic waves around us. Everything, all of our modern technology works on this principle, and everything we see works on this principle. But there are ways that are outside of our perception that are undetectable to us, and at a quantum level, these waves may potentially contain large amounts of information. We send all of this information to each other through electromagnetic waves. So there's no reason to think that in the 97% of the universe that's unmeasurable and almost undetectable in dark matter and dark energy, it's almost crazy to think that there's not some type of information contained in that in some way. And so, most quantum physicists believe it to be true. And this is they've recently brought up the concept of the Planck field, and this is based on Max Planck's studies of the Planck scale, which is smaller than we could even possibly imagine. It's crazy how at one point we thought atoms were the smallest thing, and then we know that there's multiple parts to an atom, and then we know there's multiple parts to those parts, and then mathematically they've come up with a number that they believe would be the smallest physical measurement of something, and they say beyond this the math breaks down. And this is where I was talking about bridging the quantum with the cosmic as far as gravity is concerned, and this is what kept Einstein awake at night. But they've come up with a conceptual number, and the only reason this is still a theory is because we don't have the physical tools that can detect it or measure it. It's way too small for us to even measure. It's unbelievably small. If thing is like if the human body is potentially made up of hundreds of trillions of cells. Each one of those cells are made up of hundreds of trillions of protons, and then the size of a Planck spherical unit on the inside of that proton would be the equivalent of like a grain or the head of a needle in the middle of the dome of the Vatican or something. And that Nassim Haramein explained it as that, and he's one of the scientists that have been making some of the most profound breakthroughs in this field. A lot of his work is debated, and it's not widely accepted by the scientific community yet. But I think we're going to get there one day. So I'm not gonna get too deep into some of the things that he references because he's talking about coming up with a whole new form of gravity and different technology to change the gravitational field and stuff. And maybe that's where some of this alien technology comes from, and some of these shifts that we've been seeing and hearing about, and that Joe Rogan and is always talking about on his channel. But that's not my point tonight. And a lot of that stuff is controversial. But what's not controversial is that there is a vast amount of information contained somewhere, and we can't measure it. We don't have the tools. Just like you need this cell phone to get the information that's traveling from these satellites, we don't have the right tool to detect what's in this 97% of dark matter and dark energy that we know is all around us that we can't measure. So if that that's undebatable. Whether or not it's even possible to make these tools is that's a different story. But Carl Sagan he always said the cosmos is in us, and we're a way for the universe to observe itself. So he was hinting at this somehow conscious field of information around us, and I think it's safe to say thoughts don't come from nothing. So where do our thoughts come from? Uh, you c- you could say that they're just a result of neurons firing in our brain, and there's a strong argument to make for that. But now we know these days that back in the day they didn't really know like where this information was contained. They didn't know the neurons fired off in the brain, and yeah, I missed a bunch of stuff. I think the best way to prove this, not only through scientific measurements, and we'll get to how they do that, but that stuff can get really complicated. But even just through the basic laws of logic, and I think philosophy is important to bring up here because there may be some things that we can't prove with science, and whenever anyone that's religious is making the argument, and I've debated with a lot of religious people, and I've watched a lot of religious debates, their strongest arguments are only of some sort of infinite, ubiquitous creator, some ever existing and all knowing creator. That's the only thing that an atheist can't answer is where did we come from and where are we going. Other than that, none of their arguments are valid for a specific type of religion. We don't need to personify these things. They don't need to anthropomorphize these figures to speak the truth about them. It doesn't need to be some sort of deity. So that's why when I said that I would argue for a perspective of dualistic monism. Some people would call it dualistic monotheism if you want to call this one single field of creation a god. But I don't deify it, so I wouldn't call it monotheism. And I've left some comments trying to clarify that, so I hope I can do that tonight. What I would consider if I was going to call it God, and if you were going to consider it monotheism, that God would be the unified field, what's known in science these days as the unified field from the unified field theory. And that's just that all of these things exist as one as one infinite unified field. um, for a long time, even the concept of materialism, the only argument against that was that, and even in Newtonian physics, was that we need to be separate to exist. Empty space is necessary for motion, and you could see how, on a macro level, that would make sense. But it was even more than 2,400 years ago, Parmenides knew just through the a series of thought experiments that there can't be such thing as empty space, and he hinted at this for a long time. And this is why I think thought experiments are so important and so necessary. And philosophy's a necessary part of science, even if they've been separated for so long. Philosophical science may be the answer, but trying to bridge the gap between the two. Even Einstein, his experiments, his theory of relativity started out as thought experiments. He couldn't physically prove any of the things that he was coming up with, and that's why he didn't even get as much credit as he deserved until many years later, when we could actually prove that there was gravitational lensing happening around planets and black holes. But he knew through a series of thought experiments, and that's why I think they can be really powerful. A lot of the greatest scientific discoveries have started out as a series of thought experiments, and they've been theoretically proven with these thought experiments. Because obviously Einstein couldn't ride on a bolt of lightning, but he could imagine it, and he can come up with the numbers and lay out the logistics of it in his mind to come up with some really solid conclusions that were proven many years later. So Parmenides, 2,400 years ago in ancient Greece, had a quote. He said, "What is, and what is not is not." What he was hinting at is that nothing can't exist. His philosophy was that there can't be such a thing as empty space, because if, say like I'm trying to move my hand from here to there, what am I moving my hand through? You can't move your hand through nothing. There has to be something there, because if it didn't exist, you wouldn't even be able to talk about it. And this is obviously a circular loop of logic, but it does, based on the laws of logic, it defies the laws of logic. So just based on that, he figured there must be something. And the way I would look at it is like similar to a fish in water. You might ask a fish, "What's between you and that other fish?" And they might say there's nothing there. It's just empty space. But we know that there's water there. Now we know that there's air between all of us, but it's not just air. This air is filled with more than we even know. So someone who might be able to zoom out from a fourth, fifth, or sixth dimensional perspective, depending on how you want to look at it, they might say that, we're separated by this something, this field of however you want to look at it. But there's not nothing there. And in that sense, Parmenides concluded that everything is one. Nothing can actually be separated. And this comes full circle to our modern understanding of quantum mechanics, where Max Planck, who I was mentioning before, Max Planck said that the universe is fundamentally unified but superficially divided. And through the sacred geometric perspective, it's perfectly reasonable to understand, if you have one solid point, one solid circle, there can be no experience. And it's you can make a strong argument that without no experience, there is no existence. Can there be existence without experience? So with one single point, you have to separate. You need some sort of division in that point just to have a perspective. The universe can't observe itself. So this is the theist argument for creation. How can we have a universe without some sort of conscious creator? That conscious creator doesn't need to be deified at all. That conscious creator could be represented as this unified field. And you know, even through like the classic Christian theology, saying that there can't be physical without non-physical. Again, that's one of their strongest arguments, and science has been hinting at that too. So their argument is that, science is proving their point, but it doesn't prove any of the stories or any of the dogma, or any of the other things surrounding that. And I'm not trying to belittle that. I think that might have been the best way for us to understand it, or one of the best ways. Same with the Akashic records and the perspective of Hinduism, and it's also known in Buddhism too. They had the net of Indra, and that was just known as a universal web, or a net, I guess, not a web, but it was supposed to just connect everything, all of the physical with the non-physical, the Akash, and then the two of them together was known as Brahman. So again, I'm not saying that they're wrong. I'm just saying that you don't have to anthropomorphize these things. You don't have to give them human qualities. Um, but it is, but science does hint towards the fact that the physical either arises from the non-physical or exists parallel to the non-physical. This is also represented in supersymmetry, which is one of the strongest theories in quantum physics these days, saying that every particle has a supersymmetric particle that is equal in mass but opposite in spin. It's just it lies outside of our detection. So this may be the Akash that Hinduism points towards. And it could also explain, like where thoughts come from. Because again, I think there's an interesting thought experiment in philosophy called Mary's Room. And in this thought experiment, the idea is that you have this girl named Mary, and she's sitting in a room, and she studies everything you could possibly know about the light spectrum and color and painting, but she has no color in that room. She can't see anything. It's all black and white. And she literally learns everything you could ever possibly know and everything we ever will know about vision and the light spectrum and how the eyes convert these wavelengths into perceivable light. When she steps out of that room, would she be able to know if blue is blue? And uh, they, that if she's never experienced it, it's almost the same way. Like you could study taste buds and you could study taste and the neurochemical reactions to different tastes that we have, but can you actually explain what the taste of chocolate is to someone without them actually tasting it? Scientifically, they can understand everything about it, but until they actually experience it, is it possible for them to know it? And and so looking into that, I did find there was a man named John Dalton who's known as the father of modern atomic theory. But he also did a lot of work with color spectrums and understanding how the eyes convert wavelengths to light. And he was colorblind himself. And he's one of these people who basically understood everything he possibly could about colors and the light spectrum, but he even said himself he'll never know what it's like to experience the color blue. There's no way for him to really experience that. So my point is that these things, I think a dualistic understanding of reality is necessary. These things, there's some sort of information that exists that is just it's beyond neurochemistry. It's beyond synapses firing off in our brain. For a long time, most cultures, nobody really knew that our brain produced electricity and that all these neurochemicals were being created in our brain and then boosted out towards our body, and even the chemicals made in our heart and neurons firing off on our heart, electrical pulses, and that those things are directly connected with our health and our mood and our thoughts and our dreams. Before they knew that, they they used to really believe that there was a lot of theories, and this was actually in a lot of different scientific journals. They thought that when you immerse yourself in a color, if you're experiencing a color, they believed that your brain on the inside of your head was that color. It was a pretty strong leading scientific theory for a long time, which is interesting. But we know now these days that's not true. And if you're picturing a triangle in your head, you're never going to be able to cut open your head and see a triangle. So neurochemistry does not explain our thoughts as much as we want it to. It doesn't explain where our thoughts are, where they exist, or where they come from. This is a case where I would say correlation is not causation. There's definitely correlation with our neurochemistry and our thoughts, but I don't think that our brain chemistry is the causation of these things. S and this is not any it's not a new perspective. This is well known from the Jungian perspective of the collective unconscious, where he believed that all unconscious or all thoughts existed in an unconscious field or realm, and that we kinda tap into that, we kinda tune into it. And Nassim Haramein, the physicist I referenced before, he had a good quote about this where he said, looking for thoughts in the brain. I might be misquoting this. I don't want to mess it up. I didn't write it down here, but he said looking for thoughts in the brain is similar to taking apart a radio and looking for the newscaster inside of the radio. So I think it's a good analogy. We are not a result of our brain. Our consciousness is not simply a result of our brain. Our brain might be like the antenna for the radio, but we're definitely tuning into fields of energy and information around us that are everywhere, that we we might not have the correct tools yet to observe them objectively, but we can observe them subjectively, and I think that's one of the strongest and one of the most fascinating things about consciousness. Consciousness is one of the most obvious things, but one of the most elusive things. We can't come up with a scientific explanation for consciousness. Some would call it awareness, but then what about the subconscious? There are things that are going on in some sort of realm of thought that we're not aware of, and that's our unconscious thoughts, and that's what's running most of the biology in our body. And we also know that you could be worried about something that could be affecting your mood. It could be causing you stress, even when you're not consciously thinking about it. Well, we can only hold so many conscious thoughts at once, but our subconscious thoughts are still affecting us. So consciousness is more than just awareness. And yeah, so and it's also, I think it's safe to say that consciousness, it's not localized. It can't be localized. These thoughts, if that was the case, then again, you would be able to look inside someone's brain. Like, I want to know where these things are when and you could say that they could you could even argue that it's a result of what we're observing. So our thoughts only come from external feedback from the world around us. But I want to know where your thoughts are when you're dreaming, and where exactly do they exist? You're not, trying to explain it through neurochemistry is like, again, like with the radio and the announcer and the radio reference, but like with this, it's more visual. So it's like it's like explaining it through neurochemistry is like trying to explain the wiring inside of the TV. And that doesn't give me the screen. There's not a screen inside of our heads that we could observe. If you cut open someone's head, you're not going to see their dreams on a screen. What are we seeing and where are we seeing it? There's no scientific explanation for that, not yet, at least, unless you get into some of these fringe theories. Um, I also wanted to mention, just to give credit where it's due, like Aristotle also rejected the idea of empty space. He had his common phrase was horror vacui, meaning nature abhors a vacuum. He believed that if there was any such thing as empty space, it would automatically be filled by anything around it. Therefore, because we know something exists, we know things exist, nothing can't exist, and empty space would be nothing. So, but a lot of people didn't respect him for that, and they say like, and that even what you learn through a lot of things in school these days, it's like that they'll say like Aristotle was proven wrong through Newtonian physics, but quantum mechanics is definitely bringing us full circle again, right back to that knowledge and showing us that there is no such thing as empty space. Even like I said, scientists, they we thought that we were able to create a perfect vacuum for a long time back in the 20s, 30s, and into the 40s. They would create this perfect vacuum, and they said, okay, so maybe out in space it's not a perfect vacuum, but we're able to recreate that in a lab. But at that time, we just didn't have the right tools to detect what was in that vacuum. Now we know through the detection of neutrinos, and like I said, the way that dark matter and dark energy affects the neutrinos around that, we know that it's not a perfect vacuum. We know that there's vast amounts of information and something in those fields. They exist on the Planck scale, and it's just too small for us to physically detect right now. This is also represented the same concept of dualism, like I'm talking about how humanity is culturally coming full circle back to our original understanding that seems to be hinted at in the oldest stories of mankind. And I kind of like skipped over this and didn't put it in my notes, but I did want to mention this because I think it's interesting. If I'm not sure how long we've been up yet, but I can't even see. But oh yeah, 40 minutes. Okay, I don't want to take too long here, but I do think it's interesting and it's necessary that this cycle of, like I said, coming to wisdom, knowing thyself, and becoming I am that I am. I think it's been reflected in all of the stories throughout mankind as far back as we could tell. The story of Odysseus, where he leaves his hometown humble, but then ends up returning right back where he started, but he comes back as the ruler. It's also in the story of the prodigal son in the Bible, where he goes out, spends his father's riches, comes back, and he's completely humbled and has a new understanding. The point is that we end up right back where we started, but we're completely changed by that. And this is reflected in the Fibonacci spiral. Again, it comes full circle, ends up back where it started, but it with a little bit of growth after that. And this is what we see conceptually in nature, and it's I mean, I could go on. Actually, I could do a whole episode all about that, how just stories and movies from mankind represent that same exact theme. And I don't think it's a stretch, honestly. I think it's pretty obvious to see that in The Wizard of Oz, they go through that story. The lion at the end of the movie, the wizard didn't give them anything that they didn't already have. He gave them symbols of what they were looking for the whole time, but they learned that going through that journey, the lion had to show courage throughout that journey. And then the wizard just gave him a symbol of that. The Tin Man had to use his brain. Even though he didn't have one, he found out that he actually had it in him somewhere all along. And every story, it's I've I think about, like, even with Shrek, uh, the famous story of The Alchemist by Don Miguel Ruiz. I think that was, like, my favorite one that displayed it because it included dreams, where he had that story of a dream of treasure, and the dream was telling him that he had to travel to Egypt to find it or something, to the pyramids. It's been a long time since I read it, but he goes through this whole journey, learns that he learns the value of riches and money, and he gets humbled throughout this journey, so that when he reaches the pyramids, he finds some sort of seer or prophet that ends up telling him of a legend of this treasure that's buried back where his homeland is, and it ends up being right, like, in his backyard. So he finds out he traveled all the way to Egypt just to find out that it was buried in his backyard, but it was necessary for him to go through this journey because otherwise he probably wouldn't have been able to sustain those riches. That's basically like the moral of the story. And I think anyone who when I repost this, anyone leave it in the comments if you could think of more stories that kind of reflect this theme of someone leaving their home or leaving, starting out at a certain point and having to go through these experiences to come back and end up right back where they were. I think of, like, off the top of my head, I think of, like, Coraline, even she went through the same thing, and, I don't know, it's in almost every story. It's the classic hero's tale. It goes all the way back even to Greek tragedies, and I think this is what we're experiencing culturally on a global level. And I think that cultures experience it, uh, in pockets too, and through the ebb and flow of the rise and fall of civilizations. I think it's reflected everywhere, actually. Just even in the cycle of life and death. Like we start out, we start out crippled and in our diapers, and we end up basically crippled and in our diapers again. But that's a very rudimentary way of looking at it. But we end up right back where we started, kind of, but with a totally different understanding from a different perspective. And like I said, I think that's where we're coming now, and I think that's why science has been hinting so much more towards spirituality, but not the dogmatic realm of spirituality, the philosophical realm. It's been known in Neoplatonism too for a long time. They talk about the hierarchical structure of unity coming out of material existence, and the interconnected nature of that. They hint towards that a lot. Uh, I don't know, and so now that's kind of the philosophical understanding of it. And again, the only reason I thought the philosophy was necessary is because you can't if you don't get a good grasp of that, the scientific perspective, the scientific implications are only going to come up short. So I do think it's necessary. And I just think it's fascinating that philosophers that long ago, like Aristotle, made the argument for no such thing as empty space, and we thought he was wrong for so long. And the thing is, Newton also wasn't wrong. He we do need the separation of things in order for movement, but what causes that separation is not emptiness. It's simply a matter of vibration and frequency and density. And we know through quantum mechanics that density is a result of vibrational frequency. So we're all, there is no such thing as empty space. There's no such thing as non-existence. We're all just everything is separated through its uh, its its frequency, its vibration. And this is what the unified field theory hints at. That suggests deeper layers of reality. We know through quantum entanglement that two particles can become entangled, and no matter how far you separate them, whatever you do to affect one particle has a direct effect on the other particle, no matter how far away it is. And this was what Einstein called spooky action at a distance. He didn't like the Copenhagen interpretation of these things just breaking down over time. He believed there had to be some other form of explanation. There had to be some way that the particle knew maybe ahead of time what was going to end up happening to it. And this is where a lot of his theories for time and relativity break down. And this is what kept him up at night. But I'm sorry if anyone is commenting. I'm not seeing comments. I'm not sure how everything's looking out there. Uh, so yeah, so what would explain this quantum entanglement, this spooky action at a distance? What's funny is that, and the reason I don't reference Schrodinger's cat too much is that Schrodinger had his theory on quantum collapse, saying that these realities break down over time. But I don't think that most people realize Schrodinger came up with that thought experiment of Schrodinger's cat kind of as a joke. And he kind of made it just he was putting it out there like how ridiculous is it to believe that this cat is alive and dead at the same time. So that's why I never well, I mean I did mention it in that video and I did make a short about it, but I don't really like the way that the Copenhagen interpretation explains the collapse of quantum fields. So, but the theory in quantum mechanics is a supersymmetry and non-locality. So when we try to measure an electron, we have to shine a light on it to be able to see it and measure it. When we measure it, we find that it could be in any state in multiple states at once until you finally snap that picture on it. And they've done this through uh, you take away that light as much as you possibly can, because the issue is when you try to shine a light on this, it creates heat, and we all know that heat is just motion within these particles. So these electrons start spinning faster and faster. This is what causes particles to separate at an atomic level because the electrons are spinning so fast around the nucleus, and that creates that force, that centrifugal force that starts to pull it outward. And this is why hot air is less dense than cold air because those particles are spinning and they're separating and they're spacing out. And this is also what makes hot water or hot drinks more soluble. That's why you can fit. That's why you can stir sugar into a hot drink because those particles are heated up. They're spinning and they're spreading out. So my point is that when we shine a light on this, light is electromagnetic energy. It is inherently heat. E equals mc squared. You don't get this energy without this heat. It's inseparable. So when you shine this light on these subatomic particles, they're so small that they're so affected by this light causes them to spin so fast that we can't get a clear picture on it. So what they have to do is they have to tone down that light to such a scale that we can barely see it. And then you have to measure through the density of that particle where this electron is when you take that picture. And what they realize is that that electron exists in potentially all possible outcomes, at least 11, and this is where the 11 dimensions of string theory come in, at least 11 outcomes at once. That electron is not in a localized position. And this is the theory of non-locality in quantum physics. And again, it's a really rudimentary way to try to explain it. It's obviously really like vastly complicated, but that's like the best way to try to put it into words. And of course, we know they say if you think you understand quantum physics, then you don't understand it. So these things they're inherently mind-boggling. But that's the basic explanation of non-locality, and this supports the many worlds interpretation. And Einstein was onto something. Again, it's interesting because Einstein didn't know what he was onto when he said that it's possible that when you come to a fork in the road, there may be another universe where you turn left. You may go straight in this universe, and there may be a universe where you turn right. And this is what what quantum mechanics is pointing towards right now, is kind of saying that same thing with the many worlds interpretation. Because again, Copenhagen interpretation, uh, although it's very popular and it did explain a lot of things for us, most quantum physicists don't really accept that these days. They don't accept that. Again, if you take a picture of that electron, they don't think that they don't think it's going to snap into position when there's conscious interference. And that's what's kind of understood these days. They say until you consciously observe it, it doesn't come in, doesn't it does it exists in all possible positions. So, and uh, that could be argued. Like Neil deGrasse Tyson says, it has nothing to do with consciousness. In the Copenhagen interpretations, they show how it'll break down over time just through its own velocity. But what we know now is that these things don't break down until there's some sort of interference. But through supersymmetry, what supersymmetry says is that that one electron was existing in all possible places at once. And once you observe it, they all split into their own potential realities. This is the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics. And it sounds crazy, but I'm not making this up. And it is probably one of the most, if not the most widely accepted theory in quantum mechanics right now. Copenhagen, just like Newtonian physics, was necessary for us to understand these things at that moment. But uh, through the understanding of Planck fields and the Planck scale, where quantum physics has come to some new understandings. And I've witnessed these things even just in my life. I remember, uh, now we know that the Higgs field exists. They didn't know that when I was a kid. I remember they were searching for the Higgs field. Now we know that the Higgs field exists, and we know that the Higgs field is what gives everything its mass. So for a long time, that was just people thought a lot of that was like fringe science, and it wasn't widely accepted. But the Higgs field is real. So I believe this Planck field is potentially real, and this Planck field is what contains all of this information of our consciousness and our thoughts, and potentially even our dreams. Because again, our dreams don't just exist in our head. These realities have to exist somewhere. So the many worlds interpretation in quantum mechanics says that these many worlds are constantly happening, and even through the collapse in the Copenhagen, even if you believe the Copenhagen interpretation, with the concept of infinity, it's safe to assume that these quantum systems are collapsing infinitely on every scale at all times, potentially creating an infinite realm of realities and universes. And again, like I know it sounds crazy, but even David Bohm, we've talked about David Bohm and Bohmian mechanics before. I have a whole video on him and some of his studies, but widely respected physicist in his field. I have a quote from him here. He said that inseparable quantum interconnectedness is the fundamental reality, and independent parts are just formed within the whole. So again, that is infinite unity. That is one ultimate creator. So when we're talking about like the universe, that's why I say I believe the universe is God. And I think like a common misconception, and this is actually just semantics, really. In talking about the universe, and when I start making arguments for the many worlds interpretation, people say the many worlds interpretation, like haha, scientists, all the leading scientists say that many worlds interpretation proposes a multiverse theory, and I get that, and I refer to I like to argue for the multiverse, and I like to argue that the universe is God. So they think that's a contradiction, but that's simply semantics. The prefix uni in universe just means one. It doesn't mean that our observable universe around us is the entire universe. When I say that the universe is God, I mean whatever these many worlds, these multiverses, I mean the amalgamation of all of them as one. This is one infinite field creating a series of potentially different multiverses within it. But and I believe in multiverses potentially, as far out as we can zoom. We don't know what's out there. But I think it's when I talk about the universe, I'm not referencing our observable universe. I'm referencing the collection of every potential verse in existence. And I believe that is the best definition of God. I think that fits the definition of God, a ubiquitous, infinite, all-knowing creator. It doesn't have to be dogmatic. Uh, so that's basically my argument for it. In it, there's a lot of different theories, and I think it's important to say all the leading theories in astrophysics and in quantum mechanics are hinting towards this same thing. And there's different theories. There's the holographic principle, and uh, no matter how you look at it, all of these things hint towards an infinite circular creation. Even from string theory to superstring theory to the membrane theory to the bubble theory. These are all proposed theories in quantum mechanics and astrophysics, and we don't know which one of them is going to be correct. Like I said, I'm pretty sure, and maybe someone could correct me on this. I might be wrong. I'm pretty sure many worlds is probably the most widely accepted and the most promising field, or the most promising theory in this field. But, no matter which one of them you look at, even from the perspective of the bubble theory, the bubble theory just says that these each one of our conceptual universes exists in a a bubble of vibrations, and these bubbles are just parts of larger bubbles, and it's basically bubbles splitting out from each other on a fractal level, infinitely inward and outward. So it doesn't really matter however you want to look at it. And even the super string theory, like the string theory started out with, what was it, like 9 dimensions, and then they went to 11 dimensions, and then super string theory goes out to 36 dimensions, and then they start saying there's potentially infinite dimensions. So like all of them, you know, they they can bicker between themselves about which one really is the most promising. And maybe we can't prove it. Maybe at these scales that we're talking about, these things will have to remain theories. And no matter how much you get the mathematics to prove it, it might not be measurable and detectable from our human observation. And that's why I think just this philosophical and logical approach is necessary to take. Some things might not be explainable through measurable science, but they might be, and it doesn't hurt to explore these things. And that's why, if people think it's just like a waste of time to try to study and understand these things, and everyone's just talking about a bunch of nonsense that we'll never be able to prove, that's what a lot of people thought when we were talking with like EM waves and radio frequencies for a long time. That was fringe science for a long time. They said, if you can't see it, you can't measure it. It doesn't exist. And of course, we know Nikola Tesla, although he didn't get enough credit, he was the one that said, if you want to understand the universe, you need to think in terms of frequency and vibration. And he made some of the best breakthroughs in wireless technology. He's he's the reason we had radio technology to begin with. So, and he was called crazy for a long time for believing in these things that were out there that nobody could actually grab a hold of and put into a jar. But so there's no reason to not try to explore these things and understand them farther. I think it's necessary, and that might bring us. I mean, look at what radio wave technology has brought us. It has completely changed our scope as a civilization, and I think there's no reason to believe we can't go farther and understand more. So even the Wright brothers, there was a bunch of scientific journals. It's funny, you can look them up and go back and read them. There's a bunch of leading scientists, leading physicists in their field at that time that wrote and submitted peer-reviewed articles in well-respected journals about how the human body will never be able to obtain long-term flight. They thought like it was some form of some like they would have to access some form of energy that was impossible because the density of the human body, and like they came up with all types of scientific arguments for why it would never be possible. But look at us now. So maybe like, trying to understand these things, I think it's necessary, and shutting out some of the fringe theories and trying to understand these things through series of thought experiments in the meantime until we can work on the technology, but we can't abandon the logistics of it, because that's what really brings us to these understandings. And again, I think just logically thinking about it, we there must be more of an explanation for our thoughts and our dreams and our imagination. Again, like if I'm thinking of a fire, there's not a fire inside of my head, although I can see it. But where is it? Science can't. Still, it's a question they can't answer unless you try to explain it through multi-dimensional unified field theories like this. Uh, so yeah, I think that's pretty much what I wanted to say. The universe is fundamentally unified, but superficially divided. This division is necessary for experience, and I think we're coming full circle as a society to actually really understanding these things and being able to integrate them to have a more holistic understanding of ourselves and the universe around us. And some of my videos would really put this in perspective. So once I edit this video, I'm gonna add a bunch of different pictures and graphics, and I'll reference a lot of my sources and stuff in the actual YouTube description. But I will put up the playlist for the nature of reality video because anyone who makes it towards the end of this video, I think one thing that will put a lot of these things in perspective would be that sacred geometry and the nature of reality video, and then also the waves and particles video that I did that was just a deep dive on strictly the quantum mechanics and the some of these grand unified field theories that I was referencing tonight. And that's about it. I'm not sure if I could maybe log in somewhere and try to see some comments. I'm sorry, it's been over an hour already. But I thought this was necessary. I thought it would be a good follow-up to what I've been putting out lately with the we did the chakras video and then the aura video and then the geomagnetic and the bioelectric fields video. So I thought this was a great way to bring them all full circle and kind of wrap them up into one. So yeah, again, definitely gonna put that playlist in the comment section or in the description for people because all of those videos kind of lead up to this and can definitely clarify some of these things I've been talking about. I'm gonna do my best to try to find comments now. Sorry for anyone out there that did tune in, and if you left a comment and I didn't respond. What I realized is that like I need to focus when I'm trying to do these things, and I can never get through everything I want to if I'm trying to answer comments. And I know I guess that's why all those YouTubers and stuff they say, leave your comments and we'll go through them at the end. That's what I'm gonna have to do. So I didn't respond. Oh, there we are. The issue with YouTube is that it doesn't show me my video unless I log in incognito. It doesn't show me my own live video through my own channel. So, and when I look at it incognito, it doesn't allow me to see the comments because I'm not logged into YouTube. So yeah, again, I'm gonna get Ryan over here. He's gonna help me fix this computer, and I will definitely get a better setup here. I think I'm gonna call it a night. It's too much. I might have to close this out to see the comments, even on Facebook. But it's all good. If anyone did leave a comment, as soon as I close this out and get myself settled, I will get back to you on. If anyone has any questions, definitely leave them up there, and I will definitely answer them back. And I appreciate anyone watching and anyone who made it this far. I'm gonna go enjoy the rest of my night. And I do have that video on bioelectric fields that is the next one I'm editing that I'll be putting up. And then I'm gonna want to put this one up. And then I promise, then I'll start working on the angels and demons video. But again, I don't want all the attention from all these Christian apologists trying to get my perspective on what I think God is. I figured I may as well try to explain it and then because especially on TikTok and just even going back and forth in comments, that is very, very time consuming. This, I could spend an hour doing this, and this can answer countless comments in the future. I could just reference back to this. So, and also I get the ability to explain some of the more nuanced concepts of these things, and I stand by that. Any argument that any religious person has that where they think that they've stumped someone, they can only really get them on these more ambiguous concepts, like, the concept of infinity and creation and non-existence and things like that. Uh, yeah, but, as far as, like, all the details of specific religious practices, there's no strong argument for any of that, and just because you could argue that you can't have something from nothing, so something had to have existed before the Big Bang, that doesn't imply their Yahweh or their Jesus Christ or any of that. And again, like, not to say that there's not significance in those things. I think they were necessary as a tool for our understanding, but I think it's time to put some of those things in perspective and view them through a new lens, you know? So that's about it. I think I'm gonna close this out. Thank you all for joining me on this journey. It's been fun. It's honestly, I went off the cuff there and skipped over a bunch of my notes. I probably missed out on some things. There might have been some things I want to mention, but I guess they might be a little out of place now. I had so many notes. Again, honestly, like if I would have referenced all of my notes, this would have taken way too long. I would like to make an entire video on the circular structure of the hero's journey, like I was referencing before. You know, and again, if anyone could think of any stories that show that same theme, please leave them in the comments because that's interesting to me. I had more notes here, and like The Lion King, Alice in Wonderland, even Batman. They all ended up right back where they started, but with a new perspective. But Lord of the Rings, even that's a big one. Frodo's life would have been much more meaningless if he didn't go on that journey. There would have been nothing to make a movie about. So, but in the end, he ended up right back where he started. So I don't know, and this could be, the argument for us returning back to the infinite creator, they say when we die, and whatever. And it's true. That's actually true. Regardless of how you want to look at it, we were created from the earth and we will go back to the earth. We were created from stardust and we will go back to stardust. It's just another way to show that we're all connected, we're all essentially one. There is no real separation between anything. And that's just my point tonight. Uh, thank you all. I appreciate you very much. Figure out how to close this.